There's never been a better time to be a Winnipeg sports fan than right now, and what an unforgettable weekend for Jets and Bombers fans it was. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support, especially when things are, going as well as they are right now. It has been a great time to be a Winnipeg sports fan. If you are watching either of the Jets or the Bombers, you're probably in dreamland right now, and it's been about as cool of a run as you could possibly have. And, both the Bombers and the Jets are doing some really incredible things. Winnipeg is making history. The Bombers are now in their fifth straight Grey Cup final. Really couldn't ask for more. I mean, technically you could, but let's be real, right? As far as like an incredible time to watch any of these teams is concerned, this is as good as it gets. And I want to chat a little bit about that, especially over Winnipeg's past Jets game this weekend and how that really went in just a quick moment. But before we go too much further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. But let's start off with the Jets. So Winnipeg obviously had a really good weekend, and the Jets in particular had a very dominant effort against the Dallas Stars. I thought the Stars were going to be a feistier opponent, and I think physically they definitely were. This was a very chippy game, a lot of pushing and shoving. There were some questionable hits. We saw, Maverick Bourque do a reverse hit on Cole Perfetti that I thought, in my mind, should have been penalized. It was a little bit high, but I guess because Dallas had been called for a couple of things, and then, the Jets got a weird power play of sorts on a kind of a BS interference call. It was a little bit sketchy, but then Cole Perfetti retaliated against, I forget who it was even. He might have gone after Harley or something and sort of cross-checked him into the board. So, yeah, a bit of a rough game all around. And Dallas really struggled to just get control. For the most part, for all three periods, Winnipeg was creating some sort of a dangerous chance. Through the first couple of periods, Winnipeg dominated in high-danger opportunities. And then, the third period was definitely, very firmly in Dallas's shot advantage and stuff. But because the Jets were already up like 4-0 at that point, it was sort of one of those games where you're so far ahead where you can afford to take the foot off the pedal a bit. And, obviously Dallas was pretty embarrassed. I think that they felt motivated to show up and do a little bit more than what they'd done previously, but it didn't end up mattering. The only thing that really did kind of suck was that, in the last 2 minutes, Stanley took a really undisciplined penalty, and that put Dallas on the power play. And, sure, they didn't connect on it, but right after it expired, the Stars ended up scoring, which ended the current longest franchise shutout streak in Jets history. So a little frustrated that that's kind of how that ended. It felt a little bit needless. Feels a little bit mean to complain about that, but I just feel like, it just wasn't necessary. And Hellebuyck was this close, like literally 90 seconds away from having his third consecutive shutout, which would have been unbelievable. So a little frustrating there, but that was really the only thing that I think you could really be upset about. The rest of the game was great. The power play scored twice. You had some really good depth contributions. Nemesnikov kind of tucked a greasy one away. Kupari got a really fun little goal off of Iafallo sort of messing around with Matt Dumba. It was all around just a really good game, and it didn't even have to have the top line scoring to be a solid, productive outing. It was nice to see some of the other lines get in on the action. And then, of course, your top power play unit ended up connecting later in the game. So even Scheifele and Velarde was still able to kind of get some stuff on the board. Cole Perfetti with a quiet 2-point night. Perfetti has really been kind of racking up the points left and right this season. I continue to think that, not getting them signed long-term is probably going to hurt Winnipeg at some point. But for the next year and a half, while we've still got him at basically, cut price, you really can't argue with that. Great value. And I think while the Jets are kind of in this transition period, he's going to provide like crazy surplus value. So in my mind, I think that that's totally good to make an addition. It does give the Jets some nice cap space if they want to make a big trade at some point, maybe at the deadline this year, maybe something next year too. So while the Jets have Perfetti at a cheap cap hit, I'd probably take advantage of that. You've got a lot of contracts coming off the books the next year or so. And with the Jets being this good, there's never really been a better season, it looks like, to load up than this year. Winnipeg has a really good opportunity to make some real hay this season. And I know people will say, well, don't mess with the lines if you don't have to. And every time I always hear that argument, it's kind of like, that's not the point. Obviously, some acquisitions don't go that well, but usually when the Jets make a trade, whoever they bring in has a positive impact. Even Monahan and Toffoli were pretty good in the regular season, even if the playoffs had a bit of a rougher effect. But I'll be honest, even Monahan and Toffoli not coming to the Jets wouldn't have really changed what happened in the playoffs. So I think, while you've got some great value currently on your roster, this could be an amazing season to take advantage of it. I mean, look how good this team is, 14-1-0. First team in NHL history to do that in their first 15 games. Never been done before. Winnipeg just at this point looking to extend history this coming week. And you really have to think about this as being a particularly special season for the Jets. So what a start. And the Jets weren't the only ones doing really well. If you got to catch the Bombers game, I'm not a CFL expert, but, I catch, a few Bombers games when I can. It being off of ESPN for us Americans is a little bit harder these days. So finding a helpful feed is always a bit of a challenge, but I did get a chance to watch them smack up the Riders. And it does feel like, this could be a really cool year where, the Bombers have a real chance to win the championship again. They haven't done it in the past couple of runs. The first two visits obviously went very well, and then the last two have ended in really frustrating heartbreak. But with the Argos losing Kelly, this feels like a year in which, the Bombers could win the Grey Cup, and, they have a really good setup for doing so. Kolaros looks like he's finally back. Castillo has been hitting as many field goals as you possibly could ask for. The offense is absolutely cooking. As of this past game, they gashed the Riders on the ground. And so I really feel like, this is going to be a perfect setup for Winnipeg to come away with one title. And then, fast forwarding to next year, maybe the Jets somehow come away with a really deep playoff run. I know it is 15 games in, but, with Winnipeg looking like a real threat this year, and I think it's important to stress that they are still putting things together, but they are legitimately great. And I think that that's, a departure from some seasons where, sure, they made the playoffs, but, they kind of rode on the backs of Connor Hellebuyck and some of their key star players. But this year, it's been a team effort, and I think that's a huge reflection on the staffing choices and some of the changes the Jets have made. And so far, they continue to be the top leader of the league. There's no one else really touching their record. They're 5 points clear of the next closest team, which is good for 2.5 wins. And when you consider that the next closest team in the Panthers has played as many games as the Jets have, I really think that is a testament to what Winnipeg is doing. Winnipeg's offense, also one of the top scoring in the league, if not the top scoring. A few goals ahead of the next closest opponent. And they really aren't conceding much, just 31 goals against so far. It's going to be a big year for the Jets, and you can already see some real shaping of plans heading into the postseason for a Jets team that I thought, might be in a transition period, but appears to be hungry to just hit the ground running and go for something even bigger. But obviously, around the league, there have been some big surprises, maybe some big disappointments. And I want to chat about, who's really stood out positively and which teams might be looking inwardly for some kind of an answer as to what has gone wrong at the start of the season. But before we dive into all of that, did want to shout out our friends and partners at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports available to everyone. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. If you're wondering why PrizePicks is the best choice, it's because they always put their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes, and you can even play PrizePicks alongside big celebrities like Drewski, Joe Budden, and MMA champ Sean O'Malley. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePick community every single week. And of course, they also have an injury insurance policy, so if somebody gets hurt in the middle of your lineup and you're thinking, oh gosh, does that invalidate my entire lineup for the evening? Nope, you're set. Your lineup will still stay live to give you that biggest chance to come away with a victory. There's even a bonus if you sign up today, because if you play $5, you'll get $50 guaranteed instantly. You don't even need to win. That $50 is just guaranteed with that first $5 play. If you're wondering who you might bet on for the Jets versus Rangers this coming Tuesday, I would say this is going to be a tough one. I would say Morrissey 1.5 points more. The Jets defense has been really active. Maybe from the Rangers, you could think about something similar for like Fox or Kreider. Panarin would be a good bet too. They've all been cooking, and I think if you're looking for players like that on the Jets, Morrissey, Scheifele, Velarde seems to be heating up. So I really don't think you could go wrong with any of those selections. And if you get at least 4 of those picks correct, you could win 100 times your cash. The only way you can do that, though, is to download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. I also wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to having to pay lots of hidden charges and surprise fees. Nobody likes that. A $30 ticket looks like a $60 ticket after you start the whole checkout process, and you're like, whoa, where's all this coming from? Gametime wants to make it as easy as possible. They show you your pricing all up front when you use their all-in pricing toggling feature, which is great. You just turn it on, and you see all of the final costs immediately, so you're not waiting to find out a big surprise at the end of your session. And Gametime totally gets it. They also want to help you save even more money with a brand new feature called Gametime Picks that filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. And if you want to know what you're actually paying for, they'll even show you views from your seat, so you can actually get a good sense of what your concert experience or even your hockey game experience is going to be like. No one likes obstructed views. You want the best seat for the best value, and that's why Gametime is here. They want to offer you curated deals to make it easier to find the best seats at the lowest price. And of course, they also have an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic event at Wrigley Field. Go to the Gametime app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seating and 20 to 25% off on home plate area seats. If you want to get started, be sure to download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about the biggest surprises and the biggest disappointments in the NHL so far this year. Obviously, we're about 13 to 15 games into the season, 17 games for some teams. But for the Jets, it's been a heck of a run. And, I don't think anyone thought that they'd be in first place, not only in the Central, but in the entire NHL. I would, have imagined they'd probably be somewhere in the top 4 of the Central at this point, which is a, interesting mixture of teams. I thought it was going to be a tougher division this year. So far, it kind of feels like the Central is maybe tailing off a bit. And I know it's still early, so, I don't want to read too far into it, but it's kind of nuts to see, the Jets in the Wild leading by like a minimum of 6 points over the rest of the pack. And, between the Jets and the Wild, there's another 6-point gap. So, they're 12 points up on Dallas, which is pretty insane. The Stars, have had a bit of a rougher start. I think what stood out in that game, with Winnipeg was, the defense for Dallas is not looking so hot. But the Jets, on the other hand, they're starting to control play more and more consistently against pretty good opponents. And even if one line maybe doesn't have the best evening, there are plenty of other skaters and the goaltending to really back it up. So, the Jets, I would say right now, have the best team in the NHL. I think they're going to face some teams that are probably pretty similar in composition. Teams like the Panthers, the Rangers, those squads have a lot of balance in the same way that the Jets do. But what's really nice for Winnipeg is that while they may not have the top-end 5v5 play that some of these other teams are currently going through, if the 5v5 play maybe tails off, the Jets have like the best power play in the league and a really well above average PK. So the Jets right now, I would say that they qualify as the biggest surprise. I mean, that's a really easy one because no team was ever 14-1-0 at this point in the start of their year. So I feel like that's almost a gimme. But I guess if you have to say maybe a second surprise, Minnesota not being that far behind from the Jets is also kind of surprising. I thought the Wild would probably be a little bit mediocre this year. Somehow they are second in the division, and they've done so pretty consistently by scoring loads of goals and generally limiting the amount of damage against. I wasn't really sure how this team would react to the news that Kaprizov really hasn't committed to the future of the Wild, but it just seems like with all the distractions aside and stuff, they've racked up an 8-2-0 record in their last 10 games. They've generally outplayed most of their opposition, and even when they struggle maybe to generate some offense, their defensive structure and discipline has been enough to get them through. So a really interesting opponent. Should be some interesting matchups with that team this year. If these two between Winnipeg and Minnesota end up being your division frontrunners, that should make for some epic clashes later in the season. Already, the Jets have basically owned the Central this year. They've beaten pretty much everyone in the whole division. So fantastic start to the year. Everyone has gotten a taste of Winnipeg pain, if you will. And the Jets just continue to click along. So when we start to see more and more division matchups between the Jets and Wild, that should make for some really explosive games. Another big surprise, I would have to say, is Washington being decent. I don't know that I had the Caps recovering this quickly. And when I watch them, I think the thing that stands out is that defensively, they're a little loose. The Caps are still, in my mind, a team that's in transition with the rebuild. But, guys like Connor McMichael, Alexi Protas, and a few others have started to step up. Pierre-Luc Dubois for Kemper, I think, was probably a smart swap. Dubois hasn't really been amazing for the Caps, but I feel like compared to what Kemper was doing in net for them, it's a better use of the cap space, right? You get a guy who's like a solid middle six center. He is massively overpaid, don't get me wrong, but for what the Caps are probably looking for, they just needed somebody behind Strome who can carry the burden, and I think Dubois probably does that at a reasonable level. With Kuzi gone as well, Backstrom gone, the center question has kind of become a bit of a pressing matter for Washington, especially if their whole goal is to, get Ovi to his goal record. But it does feel like they are actually pushing for a playoff spot. Somehow, they're 10-4-0, so I guess they really are here for a true playoff experience. But, for positive surprises, got to say them being that high, probably a good sign for their playoff run and playoff aspirations, especially with the Metro Division that kind of seems a little more open than I expected. I think that's one thing that's kind of standing out this year is that, there's actually not that many elite teams as constructed. I think I've mentioned that before, and that it was kind of hard to pinpoint, a couple of teams that I felt really stood above the rest. I mean, you sort of know the usual suspects. The Panthers are probably going to be great. The Canes every year are always playoff locks pretty much. But aside from that, it was going to be harder to find the truly elite squads. Elsewhere, unexpectedly, the Kings have somehow gotten into first place in the Pacific. And I know that the Pacific is the division everyone likes to crap on, but I feel like the Pacific is more competitive than it's been in years past. You've got a number of surprise teams in last season. The Canucks making a big push. The Kraken had a really solid season. Their start's been a little more modest for Seattle. The Oilers have also really middled out at like a 500 record, which I think for Edmonton's probably a little embarrassing. You look at the talent on that team and sort of the departures following the Cup Finals lost, and it's maybe not been the most exciting start to the year. McDavid now injured for a stretch as well. So for the Pacific, it's been a very topsy-turvy start. You've got the Golden Knights who are ripping opponents apart. You've got the Kings who have been able to stand through or stand up and get through some of these games and maybe not win by dominating margins, but they've been decent, right? But then, you've got the Calgary Flames who are not a great team, but they've still gotten into positive territory a lot faster than I think a lot of people were expecting. All of us sort of look at that as like a rebuilding squad. And you know what? They're above 500, which for a team that really had no playoff aspirations, that quite frankly has a roster that's just non-competitive and is likely to start to become a seller here once the trade deadline rolls around, to have, the wherewithal to get to this point and be above 500 despite having very limited talent to work with, in my mind is very impressive. So a big start to, for their season. Obviously, I'm not going to congratulate them, I guess. We hate Calgary around here, and that's never going to change, but a pleasant surprise for their fans if you have to choose one. Otherwise, I think a lot of the league has generally been more or less as expected, except for a couple of big disappointments. And I want to talk about which teams have really struggled out of the gates and maybe have some cause for concern. I know it is still early in the year, so you don't want to read anyone's funeral rites right now. But I think as you start getting closer to American Thanksgiving, that's about the time when, if you're not in a playoff spot, things are looking a little bit grim. So we'll chat about that in just a little bit. But before we go any further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you were watching Broncos versus Chiefs yesterday, you might have been thinking, wow, the Chiefs are actually going to lose for the first time. But maybe you were a Chiefs fan and you felt that there was no way that this could ever happen, that the NFL, the script was going to somehow kick in. And you're getting that hunch in the middle of the game. Well, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you're placing your bets to back your hunch up. The only way you can do that is by visiting FanDuel.com to join today. And don't forget, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting about some big surprises and big disappointments to start the year. Some of what we're going to talk about, obviously, is perhaps not crazy disappointing. We talked about big surprises like the Jets and maybe Washington being as good as it is this year. But now it's time to talk about the teams that have really started to backslide a bit. And one of the biggest teams that I think no one really anticipated struggling this much is Nashville. The Preds are just bad. After signing Saros to a big extension, trading Askarov, and then, you brought in Stamkos and Shea and Marchessault, I think there was an expectation that, Nashville would be a really good team. In my mind, I kind of felt like a lot of these signings raised the floor, but didn't necessarily move the needle. The reason I say that is that the Preds are not really a team that's ever been the biggest bruiser up front. Offensively, a lot of what they've done has kind of been driven by players like Yossi, a really strong back-end game, and some underrated, forwards up front, plus a superstar talent like Forsberg and sort of the underrated skill of an O'Reilly. But otherwise, you look at this team and it's kind of not really working the way that I think they expected, but they sank in a ton of money and it's some big free agents. But I think it just shows you that free agency is not really a way to build a successful squad. And when Trotz started spending all of this money on guys like Stamkos, I was kind of thinking that wouldn't work out in the long term. especially because like Stamkos is injury riddled. He's got a long history of that, misses a lot of time. And like Marchessault and Shea are fine depth adds, but they don't really improve the team. And it's a lot of money to spend and not really get many results. Well, now they're 5-9-1. And Trotz said that if things don't start to turn around, they are going to start thinking about rebuilding, which I don't really understand why you didn't just start off with that. This team wasn't really going to be a squad that was going to be competing for a top seed in the Central. I thought that they would be in a playoff spot, but I don't know that I was thinking that they would be, an actually true threat for a cup run. I mean, they have pieces to be good, but not a squad that I felt was going to be like amazingly competitive. Maybe they would give the Jets for a run for their money because like I thought Winnipeg might take a bit of a step back this year, but instead it's been Nashville who's really fallen off the face of the earth. They've only scored 37 goals, they've conceded 50. Things are just looking pretty bad. And it was funny because right after Trotz was saying that he thought about a rebuild, like the game after they lost something like 4-0. So the Preds, biggest disappointment so far. Another team that I think would qualify as a disappointment, although it's not really in their control, it's Colorado. The Avs have played some really good hockey, generally speaking, but because half of their scoring depth is injured, it hasn't necessarily mattered. They are struggling to keep it together, and while they do play some very up-tempo, very skilled hockey that I think has put teams like Winnipeg under the gun at times, it's not really been enough to actually see out those wins. They're 7-8-0. Half of their roster is on injured reserve or, in Nichushkin's case, suspended. So not a great time for Colorado, but, I think that there's some stuff for them to build on. But this doesn't really feel like a year where they're going to be all that impressive. Elsewhere, I think that the Flyers have to be one of the biggest disappointments for the Metro. Not like I thought the Flyers were going to be good this year, but man, are they a mess. And Michkov is already being scratched for some reason. I don't even know why. I feel like if you're trying to commit to a retooling or a rebuild, then you should just play your youth. Let them get NHL time, let them sort of learn and grow and adapt. It's not like the Flyers were supposed to be really competing for much of anything, but all the same, let your kids grow and kind of learn through some of the mistakes while the team is still young and not really competing for a title. But for some reason, he's already been scratched a couple of games. NHL coaches, they will never change, even if it doesn't really make sense. I guess you could also qualify the Canadiens as a bit of a disappointment. But, Montreal, I think everyone kind of knew was going to be bad. But I think the degree to which they've been bad maybe exceeds even some of those expectations. Speaking of the Atlantic, Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit, man, they're just all very mediocre. It feels like these teams are in this mushy mass of decent but not spectacular. And when you kind of consider that Tampa Bay is kind of right in that mix along with Boston, Boston and Tampa, at least I feel like, their front offices could maybe make some moves to get them in a better spot. Tampa has already won their cup, so it's not like they're really worried about being, the top end contender. I think that they're mostly just trying to keep the last embers of that team going for as long as they can, and to try and make, at least some headway in the postseason. Boston, yeah, the Bruins are kind of cooked at this point, but I think Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit all expected to have much better starts to the season, and it's just been a very mixed bag. The Sens keep flip-flopping between really fun offensive performances and just disastrous, embarrassing defensive mishaps. The Sabres are all over the place, a very up-tempo team, currently on a bit of a win streak, but man, there's just a lot of inconsistency in their game, and I feel like that's going to be, an issue going forward. And then Detroit is just not good. The Wings offensively lack a lot of punch, defensively ugly team. The goaltending has been pretty mediocre. They don't really seem to be all that impressive. And it's like, what, year 3 or 4 of the Yzerplan at this point? I forget how long he's even been there now. But like whatever people thought of Steve Yzerman's work in Tampa Bay, I think that they're starting to see that maybe he wasn't really responsible for why that team was as good as it was. So Detroit looks like they are very much spiraling out. There's still time for the Sens and Sabres to really turn their years around, and it seems like Buffalo has maybe started to put 2 and 2 together, but for the rest of the league, it is a bit of a mixed bag for them. So, all around the league, I think we're seeing in my mind, some middling talent this year. I feel like this is why I'm kind of encouraged by the fact that the Jets still have room to grow and improve, and they're already 14-1-0. The fact that they can still get even better is just mind-blowing to me. But that's the reality. You know, the Jets are really good. They can get even better. And, you know, with how good they've already been, you know, considering that they could add a second line center maybe of some sort, maybe another defender. I mean, this team is primed for a deep playoff run, and it's only a few weeks in. So let's hope they keep it up. You know, there's still a long way to go in the season. I think that's probably worth shouting out. 67 games for the Jets to play, but you couldn't ask for a better start and a better way to hit it off, especially when your opponents like Nashville are, you know, just stumbling out of the gates looking like they have no idea what's going on. Best time to take advantage is right now. So here's to a long season, hopefully a successful one for the Jets. Let me know who has stood up positively to you, which are the biggest disappointments. Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with the coverage ahead of Winnipeg versus New York, as well as some of the other road trip teams. But like I said, for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.